In the deepest corners of our planet, far below the reach of sunlight and memory, there are rivers that do not flow with water, but with sand. Fine, shifting grains sliding silently across the abyssal plains, carving paths through the blackness like ghostly currents. Down here, pressure crushes steel. Time feels slower, and the world above becomes a distant myth. Yet something moves in the darkness. Something ancient, patient, and endlessly sculpting the seafloor in ways almost no human eyes have seen. What forces guide these hidden rivers? What stories whisper through the trenches where mountains sink instead of rise? And why does the ocean hide so much beauty in the places we fear to look? If you're ready, let's descend. Before we continue, if you enjoy cinematic deep-sea explorations, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It helps us keep diving into the unknown. The descent always begins with a kind of forgetting. The world above, the wind, the warmth, the colors, loosens its grip as the ocean closes over us like a curtain of liquid glass. At first, the surface light shimmers in long, trembling ribbons, dancing across the hull as though trying to follow us downward. But with every meter we sink, those bright signatures fade, stretched thin by the weight of water until they fracture into blue, then bruise into a deeper indigo. Sound changes too. The familiar rush of waves gives way to a muted hum, a slow vibration that feels more like a heartbeat than noise. Down here, even silence has texture. The water cools. Pressure folds around the vessel, firm and insistent, reminding us that we are entering a world not meant for human lungs or human bones. Yet there is something strangely peaceful in this surrender. Above us, life bursts with urgency. Down here, it drifts, moves, waits. Time reshapes itself into something older and slower, as if the ocean is teaching us a different rhythm, one measured not in minutes, but in centuries. Soon, the last threads of sunlight thin to nothing. The threshold arrives quietly. One moment there is color, faint but present. The next, the world dissolves into a soft, endless dusk. It feels less like losing light and more like crossing into another realm, one ruled by shadows and the memories of things that have drifted too far from the shore. The competitors' scripts often speak of this moment with reverence, that instant when the known world slips away and something vaster reaches back. And here, in this deepening blue-black, that feeling becomes real. As we fall through this twilight zone, shapes begin to appear. At first, they are only whispers, silhouettes drifting above us like ink suspended in water. Then, slowly their outlines sharpen. Delicate jellyfish pulsing with faint luminescence. Tiny fish carrying sparks along their bodies like wandering constellations. These creatures glow not for beauty but survival. Their light's a language written in color. Some flicker to warn. Some shimmer to attract. Others float in darkness, their glow steady, calm, like lanterns guiding travelers across an ancient road. The deeper we descend, the more the water thickens. It feels alive, as though filled with invisible hands brushing past us, guiding us downward. Each meter presses us further from the world we know, and closer to a silence so complete it feels sacred. Even the instruments hum more quietly, as if afraid to break the stillness. Yet beneath this gentle drift lies something vast, an entire ocean of unseen forces, of currents moving like slow breaths through hidden valleys. And somewhere below, waiting with the patience of mountains, lies the first hint of what we came to find, the sand systems of the abyss. Down here, grains older than continents will soon appear, shifting like restless thoughts across the seafloor. But for now, the ocean prepares us, softening the edges of fear with beauty. A faint glow stirs in the darkness to our right. It pulses once, then blooms into spiraling trails of blue. A siphonophore stretching longer than a whale, its body a living chain of specialized beings working as one. It drifts past us with the grace of a slow comet, leaving behind a trail of shimmering dots that dissolve into the dark. Its presence is both haunting and comforting, a reminder that even in places untouched by sun, life persists with quiet determination. And then, just at the edge of vision, the twilight begins to thin. The darkness deepens into a heavier shade, thick as velvet and endless as space. We are nearing the boundary, the line between the dim world of descending light and the true midnight zone where life glows or hides, where pressure reigns and where the seafloor begins its silent transformations. Before we meet it, the ocean gives us one last gift, a moment of stillness so complete it feels as though time itself holds its breath. In that pause, we understand the truth of this place. The deep sea is not empty. It is not silent. It is alive with stories written in currents, in shadows, in the drifting bodies of creatures that have learned to bend darkness to their will. And somewhere beneath us, the first grains of the hidden rivers wait. The darkness settles around us like a second skin, dense and velvety, absorbing even the faint hum of our descent. With every passing moment, the pressure grows heavier, not a sudden force, but a patient one, like the closing of an ancient hand around the vessel. Down here, the ocean does not crush. It embraces. It encloses. It reminds us that we are visitors in a world shaped by weight and time far beyond anything on land. Small sparks drift through the water, scattered like stars in an inverted sky. Some flicker rapidly, vanishing as quickly as they appear. Others glide in slow arcs, tracing gentle curves through the blackness. These are the wanderers of the midnight zone, tiny creatures carrying pockets of light inside fragile bodies. Their glow feels less like biology and more like memory, as though each pulse is a quiet reminder of sunlight, carried deep into a place where sunlight no longer exists. 3211QA, 21QAZTH, descent becomes smoother, quieter. The last sense of movement blurs into a steady fall, like drifting through endless night. Our instruments whisper data in soft beeps and murmurs, but even their signals feel distant, softened by the density of the water. The deeper we go, the more it seems the ocean absorbs not just light, but urgency itself. Everything slows. Everything calms. Everything listens. At this depth, life evolves into shapes that defy expectation. A small ribbon-like fish glides past, its body nearly transparent, its organs glowing faintly with electric blue veins. It moves with delicate precision, as if the pressure has sculpted its muscles into threads of silk. Farther ahead, a cluster of comb jellies drifts like drifting shards of glass, their cilia refracting light into shimmering rainbows that ripple along their bodies. They pulse in gentle waves, creating their own language of color, a quiet conversation carried through the dark. It is here, in this dim corridor between midwater and the abyss, that the first whispers of the sand rivers begin. They are not yet visible as currents or flows, but they speak through the density of the water, through the scattered particles brushing against the hull. You can almost feel their presence, the slow, deliberate migration of sediments that have traveled thousands of miles to gather in the deepest basins of the planet. Every so often, a shadow appears in the distance, not of a creature, but of structure. Abrupt slopes rise like black walls, then vanish again as we glide deeper. These are the upper edges of underwater cliffs and ridges, the subtle markers of the terrain that will soon reveal itself fully. Down here, landscapes do not rise gently. They loom, they wait. A sudden shimmer erupts ahead, like starlight scattered through water. It takes a moment to understand what we're seeing. A school of bristlemouth fish, so countless they seem to form a single fluid shape. Their bodies reflect our lights in fragmented silver flashes, moving in a slow, undulating wave that stretches farther than the beam can reach. They are among the most abundant vertebrates on Earth, yet almost never seen by human eyes. And here they drift, unconcerned by our presence, weaving through the dark like a river of living metal. But even their spectacle begins to fade as the water grows darker still. Something shifts in the surrounding pressure, a subtle change, like crossing an invisible border. The temperature drops another degree. The bioluminescent sparks become fewer, more sporadic. The sense of vastness deepens, expanding outward in every direction. And then, gently, the seafloor appears. At first it is only a shadow, a soft darkness beneath the greater darkness. But as we lower our lights, the shape sharpens into a wide, undisturbed plain stretching farther than our vision can follow. Sediment lies in smooth blankets, untouched by waves, carved only by the slow, eternal motion of deep-sea currents. This is the threshold, the true beginning of the abyssal world. The doorway to the hidden rivers that sculpt the earth in silence. The seafloor unfolds beneath us like an ancient canvas, brushed smooth by time and untouched by any storm the surface has ever known. Our lights sweep over the sediment, revealing a terrain that feels both peaceful and unsettling. Peaceful in its stillness, unsettling in its vastness. Nothing moves at first glance. No flicker, no ripple, no shadow breaking the monotony. Yet the silence is not emptiness. It is anticipation. The grains that cover this abyssal plain are older than memory itself. They settled here long before humans learned to cross oceans, long before continents took the shapes we know today. Each particle is a fragment of a mountain, a distant volcano, a vanished coastline. They drift for centuries through the dark before finally resting here, becoming part of a seafloor that grows and reshapes itself in slow, deliberate breaths. And somewhere within this quiet landscape, the hidden sand rivers begin their long, winding paths. For now, though, the seafloor looks deceptively simple, a soft blanket stretching endlessly into the dark. But as we glide closer, faint patterns start to appear. Lines, curves, subtle depressions that seem too deliberate to be random. They snake through the sediment like trails left by creatures far too large to exist. Yet these markings were not made by animals. They were sculpted by something far more powerful, the deep-sea currents that move with the patience of planets. A faint vibration trembles through the hull, so soft it almost feels imagined. It's not turbulence. It's the whisper of movement, the subtle push of a water mass traveling across the plain at a rate too slow for the human body to feel, but strong enough to shift entire layers of sediment grain by grain. This is where the story of abyssal sand rivers begins. Not in sudden motion, but in the quiet persistence of forces that never stop. The lights sweep left, revealing a slope no more than a few meters high, but impossibly long. It curves like the edge of an ancient dune, carved not by wind, but by the steady pull of deep currents. These shapes are clues, signatures of motion preserved in the stillness. They tell of sand migrating across the seafloor the way clouds drift across the sky, slowly, silently, endlessly. A small creature scuttles across the illuminated sediment, breaking the illusion of lifelessness. At first, it appears only as a flicker, a shifting speck against the pale seafloor. When it moves again, its shape becomes clear, a deep-sea isopod, pale and armored, resembling something prehistoric. It crawls with deliberate caution, stopping frequently, as if listening to vibrations carried through the ground. Even here, on the calmest plains of the ocean's deepest realms, life navigates by feeling the motion of the world around it. Farther ahead, a cluster of brittle stars lies half buried, their arms extended like delicate threads across the sediment. They remain still until our light touches them. Then, almost in unison, they curl inward and slip beneath the surface, vanishing as though swallowed by the sand itself. Down here, survival often means disappearing. Every creature knows the value of stillness. As we continue forward, the terrain subtly shifts again. The smooth surface begins to show faint ridges, long, low bands of sediment stacked in parallel lines. They look like frozen waves arrested mid-crest. These formations are signs of a larger flow, a deeper force shaping the plain. Although we cannot see the movement directly, the marks it leaves behind are unmistakable. Something vast has passed through here, guiding the sand as though drawing pathways in the dark. We hover in silence, letting the scene sink in. The ocean at this depth is not chaotic. It is methodical. Every pattern is a result of balance between gravity and current, between the weight of the world above and the slow, constant motion of water below. These plains are not passive landscapes. They are in motion, even when the movement is too slow for the eye to witness. A dim glow appears in the distance, faint and drifting. At first, it seems like another bioluminescent creature, but its movement is too steady, too anchored to the seafloor. As we glide closer, the glow reveals the silhouette of a sea cucumber, its elongated body trailing softly across the sediment. Each step of its tube feet stirs a tiny cloud of grains, proof that even the smallest touch can change the landscape here. These creatures are the gardeners of the abyss, turning the soil of the deep in ways subtle but essential. The seafloor grows darker ahead, not from decreasing light, but from depth, a gentle slope leading into a deeper depression. Somewhere down that quiet descent, the true channels of the sand rivers begin to take shape. We cannot see them yet, but we can feel the shift, the sense that we are approaching something ancient and hidden. The ocean seems to thicken once more, preparing us for what lies beyond the ridge. The quiet changes. The darkness deepens. The story of the abyss is about to move. The depression beneath us deepens, widening into a subtle valley carved not by sudden force, but by ages of unbroken motion. Our lights trace the slope as we descend, revealing shadows that stretch long and soft across the sediment. This is where the abyss begins to reveal its architecture, where the smooth plains give way to the first hints of structure, of pattern, of direction. The sand here seems slightly darker, richer, as though the weight of the ocean has pressed it into a finer, more ancient form. As we move deeper into the basin, the water feels heavier, its silence thicker. It is a strange sensation, not fear, but awareness. Down here, even emptiness carries intention. The seafloor slowly curves around us like the inside of a giant bowl, its edges disappearing into the black. It is easy to imagine this place as a crater, a quiet scar in the Earth's underwater skin. But this isn't the aftermath of an impact. It is the beginning of a path. Small ripples appear in the sediment, delicate ridges no taller than a hand, stretching in parallel lines across the valley floor. They look fragile, almost accidental, but they are anything but. Each ridge is the result of thousands of years of slow relocation. Grains sliding in single file across the plain, nudged by deep-sea currents whose direction never falters. These ripples are the first visible signs of the hidden rivers we have come to find. Here, the sand is beginning to move. A faint shift flows through the water, not a current we can feel with our bodies, but one we can see in the smallest particles suspended around us. They drift with purpose now, pulling gently toward the deeper end of the valley. The movement is so subtle it could be mistaken for imagination, yet it persists, steady and determined. This is how abyssal rivers begin, not with rushes of force, but with whispers that never stop. Ahead, a pale shape stirs along the valley wall. It is a ghostly, elongated fish, its body nearly boneless, moving with a slow undulation that resembles smoke drifting through air. Its eyes are reduced to small, dark spots, useless at these depths, but its lateral line shivers with sensitivity, reading vibrations in the water like a blind reader tracing braille. It senses us long before it sees us. With a single flowing motion, it slips into the darker part of the basin and disappears without a sound. We follow the curve of the valley, letting the natural slope guide us downward. The sand beneath becomes finer as we descend, indicating that the flow here is older, more established. Larger sediments, Pebbles, shell fragments, volcanic grains are rare now. Only the smallest particles remain portable enough to travel across such depth. It is as though the ocean has sifted the world above and delivered its dust to this quiet channel. The deeper we drift, the more the landscape begins to feel like a map, a record etched in fine sediment. Wide arcs in the sand reveal the shifting routes of currents long faded. Narrow, darker stripes show where gravity once pulled avalanches of material down from ridges thousands of meters above. Every mark is a memory. Every line is a story of movement that took centuries to unfold. A sudden scattering of faint blue sparks interrupts the darkness ahead. For a moment, it looks like a constellation rising from the ground. Then the sparks blink out, reappearing farther along the valley floor. They belong to deep-sea shrimp, their bodies blinking in brief flashes as they forage through the sediment. Each burst of light is a communication, a brief pulse meant only for nearby companions, a language invisible to the world above. Their presence reveals something else. The sediment here is richer in organic matter, stirred often enough that nutrients remain within reach. This is another sign of the hidden rivers. Where sand moves, life follows. Even in the deepest night on Earth, movement means opportunity. We drift farther into the basin. The ripples grow larger now, stretching into shallow dunes that curve gently toward a narrow, darker path ahead. A channel. It is still small, still newborn by geological standards, but its direction is clear. This is where the sand begins to flow in earnest. This is where the landscape shifts from suggestion to certainty. Beyond this point, the abyss begins to shape itself not in passive layers, but in motion. The valley is no longer just a depression. It is a corridor. And somewhere ahead, in the deeper dark, the first true river of sand waits. The narrow corridor ahead draws our attention like a breath held too long. Its darkness is deeper than the basin around it, not from lack of light, but from something denser, more layered. The sand here settles differently. It gathers along the channel walls in smooth, sloping banks, as though shaped by a slow and patient hand. This is no longer a random depression, carved by wandering currents. It is the first quiet outline of a riverbed. As we glide into the corridor, the sense of movement intensifies. The suspended particles in the water drift with more direction now, their path unmistakably drawn toward the unseen depths beyond. They don't swirl. They don't hesitate. They flow. And in that steady, almost imperceptible migration, we witness the birth of a phenomenon once believed impossible. Rivers, not of water, but of sand. Our lights sweep along the edges, revealing faint ridges where grains have piled in thin crescents. Each crescent is a time stamp, a record of how the current has shifted over years, decades, centuries. Currents in the deep ocean don't crash or churn like waves above. They glide with the patience of continents, moving at speeds so slow they seem still to the eye. But their influence is undeniable. Over time, they carry mountains worth of sediment across the seafloor, rearranging landscapes in complete silence. The channel slopes downward, guiding us deeper. The water grows colder, pressing closer against the hull as though urging us onward. It's here, in this descending passage, that the world above becomes truly irrelevant. There are no tides here, no storms, no sunlight. Everything that shapes this place moves from the inside. The pulse of the earth, the gravity of the deep, the relentless drift of sediment that will outlast every civilization ever built. A patch of the channel wall suddenly brightens under our lights, not from reflection but from movement. A cloud of fine grains rises, curling upward like smoke disturbed by a breath. Something has passed through recently, perhaps a deep-sea fish searching for food, or a creature burrowing beneath the surface. The sand settles again in slow spirals, each grain landing in a slightly new position, altering the shape of the riverbed by a margin too small to measure, yet large enough to change the future path of the flow. The channel bends gently. With the turn comes a new sight, a wide, shallow fan of sediment unfurling like the opening petals of a stone-colored flower. Here, the river slows, allowing its load of sand to spread out across the plain. These fans are rare, marking places where currents hesitate before choosing their next direction. They reveal places of indecision in a world that usually moves with unwavering purpose. As we hover above the fan, a small creature emerges from beneath the sand, a ghostly white amphipod no larger than a fingernail. It swims upward, pauses, then spirals back down to bury itself again, leaving a faint puff of grains in its wake. Even this tiny motion contributes to the story unfolding beneath us. Life here is part of the sculpture, part of the constant reworking of the seafloor. Every shift, no matter how small, becomes part of the river's evolution. Beyond the fan, the channel narrows once more. The slope steepens. The sand beneath us takes on a new texture, smoother, finer, more densely packed. It is the sign of a river gaining momentum. If the deep ocean had a heartbeat, it would sound like this, a slow, steady pulse of sediment sliding down an unseen gradient, guided by forces too ancient and too immense to fully comprehend. For a moment, we pause our descent. We let the darkness settle. We listen to the quiet hum of the deep pressing in around us. It becomes clear that this chapter of the journey, the crossing from twilight to abyss, from stillness to silent motion, is not just a descent in depth, but an entrance into another story entirely. Ahead, the corridor disappears into a deeper black. The true sand rivers lie beyond that veil, winding through trenches where even the ocean seems reluctant to follow. We take one last look at the seafloor behind us, smooth, quiet, and vast, then turn toward the deeper dark. The descent is over. The journey has just begun. The abyssal plains stretch farther than the mind can follow, a flat expanse so vast it feels like another planet laid beneath the waves. At first glance, they appear empty, smooth, featureless, a monotone gray beneath the dim glow of our lights. Yet this seeming emptiness is deceptive. Every inch is alive with motion, shaped by forces invisible but relentless, sculpted by currents that glide silently, as patient as time itself. Here, the seafloor does not sleep. It moves, drifts, and rearranges, even in the absence of light, with a rhythm imperceptible to those who have never descended. We glide closer to the plains, and the surface reveals subtle signs of its activity. Fine ridges appear, curving gently like soft waves frozen mid-motion. These are not random markings. They are the traces of grains moving in a constant pilgrimage, guided by currents deep below the surface. Sand is not inert here. It flows with a deliberate, almost conscious persistence, like ink spilling slowly across a black canvas. The sheer scale is staggering. The plains are enormous, but every particle participates in an unending ballet, forming shapes that can only be understood in slow observation over time. Pressure hangs heavy in the water, thick and palpable, compressing both vessel and mind. Yet, within this pressure is a strange clarity. The ocean at these depths communicates through motion rather than sound, through subtle shifts rather than bursts of energy. And in this language, the plains speak. They whisper stories of sediments carried from continents far above, of volcanic ash settling after millennia, of the slow, unbroken march of time itself. Every ripple, every fold, every shallow depression tells of an ancient hand, moving patiently, sculpting landscapes without haste or apology. Amid the quiet, life begins to make its presence known. Tiny organisms drift with the current, their translucent bodies catching the faint glow of bioluminescence from afar. Some flicker with pulses of light, a faint mimicry of sunlight lost to the ocean long ago. Others drift silently, appearing almost as extensions of the water itself. These are the midwives of the abyss, stirring the sediment, redistributing nutrients, participating in the subtle choreography of the plains. Even the smallest creatures leave traces behind, tiny perturbations in the sand that will ripple outward, accumulating into patterns only discernible over decades or centuries. We hover over a stretch of the plain where the sediment subtly rises into long, low mounds. Their shape is almost dune-like, but formed not by wind, but by water and gravity. Each mound is a record of movement, a place where currents have slowed, deposited grains, and allowed the surface to memorize its passing. Occasionally, small avalanches cascade from these mounds, barely noticeable at first, but over time, enough to shift the orientation of the surrounding sand. The plains are not static. They are perpetually rewriting themselves, layer by layer, in a language written only in movement. Even the silence here is alive. When the vessel glides above, the water seems to hum with potential energy, with the stored momentum of currents flowing unseen. It is a subtle vibration that passes through the hull and into the body, a reminder that the plains are never at rest. Beneath our lights, sand shifts with imperceptible regularity, revealing hidden rivers that curve around minor depressions, hugging ridges, and flowing as surely as the wind above deserts. Here, the concept of emptiness dissolves. The plains are full of motion, full of history, full of quiet stories etched in mineral grains. As we drift, shadows of larger forms pass intermittently over the sediment. Occasionally, a ray of bioluminescence arcs across the plain, a deep-sea fish feeding, a creature burrowing, a signal of life navigating a world in constant subtle flux. These shadows remind us that the plains, though vast and unyielding, are not void. They are the stage for a slow-motion drama that has been playing for millennia, unseen by human eyes, but relentless in its persistence. We pause, letting the vessel drift with the current. The plains stretch outward in every direction, a realm so enormous it challenges comprehension. And yet, within this immense stillness, every particle moves with purpose. Every ripple marks a history. Every line whispers secrets waiting to be revealed. The abyssal plains do not sleep. They never sleep. They only flow. As we drift farther across the plains, the scale becomes almost incomprehensible. The seafloor stretches outward, unbroken, a silent expanse whose edges seem to vanish into the darkness. Yet this monotony is deceptive. Look closer, and patterns emerge. Subtle channels curving like veins across the sediment. Tiny ripples that hint at currents moving far below. These currents are slow, deliberate, invisible to the eye, but their work is relentless. They guide each grain, shift each ridge, and carve pathways across the abyssal expanse as patient as the turning of a planet. The grains of sand themselves seem alive in this context. They drift, settle, and are carried again, migrating in a migration older than human memory. Some are pale, almost ghostly, remnants of distant continental shelves. Others are darker, volcanic in origin, the residue of eruptions long forgotten. Each particle has a story, a journey measured in millennia, and together they form the hidden rivers, the secret highways of the abyss. Watching them, one cannot help but feel a sense of reverence, a quiet awe at the slow but inexorable shaping of landscapes invisible to most eyes. Pressure thickens the water around us, pressing like a tangible weight, yet the plains remain delicate in their design. Small ridges rise gently from the sediment, curving in the direction of the unseen currents. These are the fingerprints of forces that never rush, that never pause. Sometimes, fine lines fan out from these ridges, forming subtle branching patterns, as if the sand itself remembers the passage of every movement that has ever passed through this region. The plains are not silent. They are archives, holding the memory of the ocean's slow, unyielding motion. Life, though sparse, leaves its own marks. Tiny amphipods scuttle across the sand, leaving faint tracks behind them, while translucent crustaceans drift above, their bodies pulsing faintly with bioluminescence. Even the smallest disturbances are magnified here, where currents move sluggishly and the sediment has no haste. One flick of a fin, one burrow into the sand, can ripple outward for meters, subtly influencing the direction of minute sand flows. The plains are alive not only with motion but with consequence. Occasionally, larger features break the apparent flatness. Low mounds of sediment rise like tiny hills, their surfaces patterned with fine lines. These are the results of small localized currents, miniature rivers that deposit their load before merging again into the wider plains. Here and there, depressions form, small pockets where sand has been scoured away by persistent flows. These depressions are often filled with fine particles that settle more slowly, forming dark bands against the paler surface, like the veins of a stone. Every rise and dip is a marker of history, a record of the interaction between force, gravity, and the ceaseless drift of sediment. Above these features, occasional flickers of light appear, bioluminescent signals from creatures moving through the water column. Tiny fish drift like sparks of silver, barely noticeable against the muted gray of the plains. They are hunters, prey, navigators, and wanderers, living their lives in a world defined by the slow but precise currents of sand. Their presence reminds us that even here, life responds to the motion of the earth, adapting to a rhythm that is invisible to those who have never descended this far. The channel of a hidden sand river begins to reveal itself. A shallow groove, darker than the surrounding sediment, curves gently across the plains. It is subtle at first, barely distinguishable from the surrounding ridges and ripples. Yet it is unmistakable. Here, the sand has been guided by persistent movement, forming a path that will eventually stretch for hundreds of kilometers. It is the start of something vast, an underwater river flowing silently in total darkness. Hovering above, one can almost sense its pulse, a slow, deliberate heartbeat moving beneath the weight of the water. The plains are no longer merely terrain. They are alive with the memory of movement, the promise of flow, and the beginnings of the hidden currents that will shape the abyssal world for millennia to come. The hidden rivers of sand begin to reveal themselves more clearly as we drift along the plains. What once seemed like faint shadows or subtle grooves now take shape as channels, shallow but unmistakable, curving across the seafloor with deliberate grace. These are no ordinary paths. They are the highways of the abyss, created by millennia of slow, unbroken flow, carved not by storms or tides, but by the constant, patient drift of fine particles under the influence of deep, invisible currents. Watching them, one feels the presence of time itself, moving in imperceptible increments, yet reshaping the Earth's surface with absolute authority. The sediment shifts in patterns both intricate and profound. Parallel ridges ripple along the channels like frozen waves, each line a record of motion, each crest a reminder of persistence. The currents below are subtle, almost ghostly, yet their influence is absolute. Fine grains migrate steadily, moving from shallow slopes to depressions, fanning outward into miniature sediment deltas. In this slow choreography, even a single particle can have its journey altered by another shift, a delicate dance invisible to human eyes, yet ceaseless in execution. Life here is fragile and sparse, but intimately connected to this motion. Tiny crustaceans scuttle along the edges of the channels, their movements stirring clouds of sand that linger for minutes, tracing ephemeral patterns in the water. Bioluminescent organisms drift above, their gentle pulses illuminating the dark plains and scattered points of pale light. Each pulse highlights the contours of the sand, revealing the fluidity of the landscape. The plains, though seemingly still, are a living stage for these small dramas, and every interaction between creature and sediment contributes to the evolution of the riverbed. The channels begin to widen, forming shallow networks that interconnect like veins beneath the surface. Water pressure and subtle currents push the grains in repeating, rhythmic flows, creating bends and forks that hint at future paths. Here and there, miniature avalanches occur, slow slides of accumulated sediment cascading down slight inclines. These events, imperceptible at first glance, are the architects of change, shaping the plains over decades and centuries. What seems motionless to the observer above is in truth a realm in perpetual, deliberate activity. Occasionally, the smooth plains are interrupted by small clusters of rocks or outcrops, remnants of ancient tectonic shifts. Currents divert around these obstacles, creating subtle eddies and swirls in the sand that are frozen into delicate patterns once the flow continues downstream. These formations are the fingerprints of time, a record of how the plains respond to pressure, gravity, and the passage of countless grains. Each bend in the hidden river, each ridge, and each depression tells a story of endurance and adaptation, written slowly in the sediment. Above these features, bioluminescent flashes continue their quiet dance. Some originate from small fish navigating the channels, hunting for food stirred by the moving sand. Others are emitted by tiny plankton drifting with the current, signaling their presence or reacting to disturbances. In this dim, constant twilight, the faint glow of life highlights the persistence of motion, the interplay of energy, and the seamless connection between living creatures and the sediment that carries them. Nothing here exists in isolation. The plains, the rivers, and the creatures are all bound in a single slow-moving narrative. We hover over a particularly striking bend in the river, where a slight depression guides the sediment into a sweeping arc. The channel's curvature is graceful, almost architectural, revealing the elegance of forces that no eye can see directly. This is the essence of the abyssal plains, a world that appears flat and empty. Yet beneath the surface, currents sculpt landscapes, shape habitats, and trace the invisible lines of rivers flowing silently, endlessly, without pause or recognition. It is a world that never sleeps, a world where movement is constant, deliberate, and eternal. The hidden channels converge as we drift farther along the plains, forming wider corridors where the sediment seems to flow with a collective purpose. The surface of the plains, once a seemingly endless monotone, now displays subtle undulations, shallow ridges, depressions, and arcs that reveal the sculpting hand of the currents. Each bend in the channel, each curve in the sand, is a testament to the relentless motion of particles that have traveled hundreds, even thousands of kilometers. Here, the abyssal plains are no longer inert. They are alive, writing their history grain by grain. A faint tremor passes through the water, almost imperceptible, yet enough to disturb the finer sediments. Tiny avalanches of sand cascade slowly down the gentle slopes of ridges, their motion invisible in real time but monumental over years. This is how the plains transform, not with dramatic force, but with patient persistence. Rivers of sand, guided by unseen currents, carve paths across the seafloor, constantly remaking the landscape, leaving trails that speak of an ancient rhythm, unbroken and unobserved. The bioluminescent life becomes more pronounced in these wider channels. Small fish and shrimp drift above the sand, their soft glows reflecting faintly against the ridges. Each movement sends tremors into the sediment below, subtly shifting grains and nudging the river's path. The interaction is delicate, a dance between life and landscape, each influencing the other in ways too subtle to notice without careful observation. The plains may seem silent, yet every pulse, every flicker, is a signal of the world's quiet dynamism. Occasionally, darker bands of sediment appear within the channels, composed of finer or heavier grains. These streaks mark the previous flows of sand, deposits left behind by currents that have carved their way over centuries. Observing them, one can almost read the history of the river, where it slowed, where it accelerated, where it diverted around obstacles. Even minor topographical changes in the abyss, a slight rise, a shallow slope, become significant, redirecting the sand in ways that will shape entire regions over geological time. The scale of the plains becomes staggering here. From our vantage point, we see how the channels stretch endlessly, connecting ridges, fans, and depressions. Each segment is part of a network, part of a larger system that is invisible at the surface. These sand rivers function as highways, redistributing sediment, nurturing microscopic life, and sculpting habitats for creatures adapted to this constant slow-motion world. The currents never rest, the rivers never pause, and the plains continue to write their story in quiet, deliberate strokes. A small amphipod drifts along the edge of a ridge, its translucent body illuminated briefly by our lights. As it burrows into the sediment, a cloud of fine grains rises and settles, subtly altering the pattern of the channel below. Such small interactions demonstrate how even the tiniest creatures are part of the choreography of the abyss. The plain's motion is relentless, yet flexible, adapting continuously to life, topography, and subtle energy flows. It is a world of both permanence and impermanence, where time and motion converge in ways almost incomprehensible. Finally, the channels begin to narrow slightly, hinting at the deeper reaches beyond. The trenches and valleys where the sand rivers will accelerate, plunging into darker, more confined spaces. The plains behind us are vast, quiet, and eternal, but the story of the abyss is not confined to flat expanses. Beyond these wide channels lie deeper forces, hidden currents, and the beginnings of the rivers that will carve the seafloor with unstoppable persistence. The plains may appear still to the untrained eye, yet they are alive, awake, and ever moving. As we drift over the final stretch of the main channels in this section, the enormity of the plains settles in. Every ridge, every ripple, every faint groove in the sand tells a story of patient creation, of motion imperceptible to the surface world, but vital beneath the waves. The abyssal plains never sleep. They never rest. They flow endlessly, silently shaping the earth in shadows, beneath currents, beyond human sight. The hidden rivers of sand are waiting. The deeper trenches are calling. The abyss narrows as we descend, and the hidden rivers of sand begin to take on a presence almost tangible. The plains give way to subtle valleys, shallow at first, then deepening with an imperceptible gravity that seems to guide every grain. These channels are alive, not with water, but with movement as steady and inevitable as a heartbeat. Sand flows along them in long, sinuous paths, tracing the contours of the seafloor with a patience older than memory. Each ripple and groove is evidence of an invisible hand, shaping the darkness with delicate persistence. The currents here are subtle yet relentless. They carry particles scraped from distant continental shelves, volcanic remnants from long-extinct eruptions, and the scattered debris of life above. Each grain moves with a purpose, swept into the channels and directed along the hidden arteries of the abyss. The sand rivers curve around depressions, slide along ridges, and fan out across minor plateaus, forming patterns that, while invisible from the surface, create an intricate network beneath the waves. To witness them is to observe time itself in motion. Life adapts to these flows in extraordinary ways. Tiny amphipods and deep-sea shrimp drift with the current, tracing the edges of channels or burrowing into the soft sediment. Their movement is slow but constant, leaving trails in the sand that are quickly absorbed into the river's rhythm. Even the smallest creatures influence the landscape, nudging grains into new positions, shaping the channels imperceptibly over decades. In this world, motion is survival, and survival is motion. Everything interacts, every particle, every organism, every pulse of water, contributing to the ongoing sculpture of the abyss. As we follow the channel deeper, the valleys steepen and the rivers accelerate imperceptibly. The sand here is finer, more uniform, shaped by the cumulative effect of countless millennia of slow movement. The banks of the channels rise subtly on either side, forming natural boundaries that guide the flow like invisible walls. Between them, the sand slides silently, almost hypnotically, a constant procession of grains tracing paths determined by forces too ancient and immense to fully comprehend. The Abyssal River moves with a quiet authority, carving its mark in the darkness. Occasionally, a cluster of larger sediments interrupts the flow, pebbles, broken shells, volcanic fragments, their presence forming tiny obstacles around which the current folds. Over centuries, the sand rearranges itself around these interruptions, smoothing their edges, incorporating them into the river's ongoing design. Each alteration tells a story, where a current slowed, where life disturbed the sediment, where gravity pulled a cascade of grains into a new formation. The rivers of sand are not chaotic. They are deliberate, eternal, and exacting, sculpting the seafloor with the precision of an artist. Above the channels, faint glimmers of bioluminescent life punctuate the darkness. Tiny fish, lantern-like, drift along the edges, their bodies illuminating ridges and depressions with soft pulses of light. Crustaceans flicker past, leaving trailing clouds of grains in their wake. Each spark of life highlights the motion below, revealing the pathways carved by invisible currents. The deeper we descend, the more pronounced these rivers become, their channels widening and curving, stretching into valleys that vanish into the unseen distance. The sand moves, and in its movement, the darkness itself seems alive. The deeper trenches approach, and the channels begin to merge, forming broader arteries that pulse with the slow, unrelenting motion of sediment. Here, the sculptors of the abyss, the currents, the grains, the smallest creatures, converge to form landscapes both delicate and immense. Each turn, each bend, each widening of the river marks the passage of time, a record written not in words but in motion. In the abyss, the rivers of sand are both builders and witnesses, silently shaping the earth's hidden floors, unseen and unending. The story of motion, persistence, and silent artistry continues onward. Deeper, darker, the sand rivers carve their paths, unstoppable and eternal. The channels deepen as we glide forward, the sand rivers widening into corridors that seem to flow with a life of their own. The plains above were passive in comparison, vast, silent, and patient. But here, in these descending valleys, motion becomes unmistakable. The sand slides continuously, grain by grain, tracing curves and bends as if guided by some unseen architect. There is no hurry. The rivers are deliberate beyond human comprehension, flowing in a rhythm measured not in hours or days, but in centuries and millennia. Faint ridges line the sides of the channels, their edges sculpted smoothly by the constant passage of sediment. Between them, the finer grains shimmer faintly under the vessel's lights, revealing the subtle undulations of the current's invisible hand. The river bends gracefully, curving around minor depressions and rising over shallow mounds, as if responding to forces imperceptible yet absolute. Here, gravity, pressure, and the slow pull of deep-sea currents converge, crafting a landscape that is fluid yet permanent, alive yet silent. Life persists in the midst of this slow-motion theater. Tiny amphipods crawl along the edges of the banks, stirring the fine sediment into delicate clouds that drift slowly downward. Bioluminescent shrimp pulse softly above, casting faint light that illuminates the flowing sand beneath them. Each movement, however small, influences the sediment's path. These creatures are not just inhabitants of the abyss. They are participants, co-sculptors of the hidden rivers, their tiny acts echoing across decades in the subtle shifts of the sand. As the channels descend, occasional interruptions appear, small clusters of volcanic rock, broken shells, and mineral fragments. The currents navigate around these obstacles, pushing sand into temporary eddies and swirls that smooth themselves over time. The river adapts, flowing around them with a patient persistence, never forcing a path, yet always progressing. Each diversion, each ripple, each deposition becomes a permanent mark on the seafloor, a quiet testament to the persistent energy that sculpts the abyssal world. The river's curvature grows more complex. Branches split off into minor tributaries, depositing fine grains into shallow basins before rejoining the main flow. These tributaries form delicate fan-like patterns, frozen in time, yet constantly reshaped by the slow passage of sediment. Watching them, one senses the slow pulse of creation itself, subtle, measured, relentless. The river does not rush. It does not demand attention. And yet, its work is inexorable, carving landscapes that will endure far beyond any human memory. Occasionally, a faint glow appears farther along the channel, the flash of a deep-sea fish passing overhead, or a cluster of bioluminescent plankton drifting on the current. These sparks of life illuminate the movement below, highlighting the precise fluid lines of the sand rivers. Shadows ripple along the banks as grains tumble imperceptibly, forming ridges and depressions that guide future flows. In this darkness, every light, every movement, every shift in sediment is magnified, revealing the hidden architecture of the abyss. The river bends once more, curving around a shallow depression where the current slows slightly, depositing its heaviest load. Here, the sand fans outward, forming a subtle delta that merges back into the main channel. The lines are faint, delicate, yet unmistakable, signatures of motion that persist for centuries. In this quiet, invisible world, the rivers of sand continue their endless work, shaping the darkness with patient hands, unseen by all but the creatures that inhabit it. And as we follow the main channel, deeper into the trenches, the full scale of their artistry becomes apparent. These are not mere paths of sediment. They are sculptors of the abyss, rivers that carve, shape, and define landscapes in total silence. The deeper we go, the more expansive, intricate, and eternal they appear, an endless testament to the power of motion in a world without light. The sand rivers deepen into trenches now, their corridors narrowing while the banks rise with quiet authority. Here, the motion of the grains is unmistakable, a gentle yet persistent flow that sculpts the seafloor with unparalleled patience. Every ridge, every curve, every ripple is a record of the unseen currents guiding the sediment over centuries. The channels twist and bend as if following an ancient blueprint, invisible to the surface world, but etched with precision beneath the waves. The sediment here is finer, almost silky, responding to the currents like a slow, deliberate tide. Grains slide over each other in soft, unending cascades, creating subtle patterns that shift imperceptibly over time. Even the slightest disturbance, a passing amphipod, a drifting plankton cloud, or a tiny fish navigating the channel, alters the sediment's path, leaving traces that ripple outward, slowly integrating into the ongoing flow. In this abyss, motion is both creation and preservation. Every movement reshapes the present and records the past. The walls of the trenches rise gradually, their slopes covered with delicate ripple marks formed by years of shifting currents. Small depressions appear along the edges, pockets where sand is gathered after slow avalanches, creating miniature terraces. Each formation tells a story: the direction of currents, the intensity of flow, the subtle influence of obstacles along the way. These hidden rivers are not uniform. They are organic, sculpted by countless factors interacting in perfect synchrony. The abyssal floor, once thought featureless, is alive with deliberate design. Above, faint pulses of bioluminescence punctuate the darkness. Tiny creatures drift in the water column, their lights briefly illuminating the ridges and depressions below. Shadows ripple across the sand as they move, creating transient patterns that mimic the very motion of the rivers themselves. It is a dance of light and motion, subtle yet profound. In these moments, the boundary between life and landscape blurs. The currents, the sediment, and the creatures are intertwined in a single, flowing system that persists beyond human perception. Occasionally, larger fragments, volcanic pebbles, broken shells, and mineral chunks jut from the sand, interrupting the flow. The currents navigate around these obstacles gracefully, creating miniature eddies and swirls, depositing fine grains into quiet pockets before resuming their journey. Each obstacle is both a challenge and a sculpting tool, shaping the path of the river and leaving traces that will influence its course for decades. The trench is alive with motion, yet motion that is invisible to the untrained eye, a world of patient artistry unfolding in silence. The main channel begins to widen, forming sweeping curves that hint at the scale of the rivers beyond. Tributaries merge seamlessly, their flows combining to create more powerful, steady currents that carry sand farther than before. These channels, though hidden in darkness, dictate the rhythm of the abyss. They are the architects of the seafloor, carving valleys, shaping slopes, and redistributing sediment in ways both subtle and monumental. The more we follow them, the more their magnitude becomes evident, a network of silent rivers moving in eternal procession. As we trace the bends, a soft hum seems to resonate through the water, not from the vessel, but from the subtle vibration of moving sediment. The abyss feels alive, conscious in its slow, deliberate motion. The trenches, once thought empty, are full of energy, full of memory, and full of creation. Each grain contributes to the ongoing sculpture. Every current reinforces the channels, and every living creature interacts with the flow. The rivers of sand are not passive. They are creators, shaping darkness with patience, precision, and relentless continuity. And as we drift deeper into the widening trench, the artistry of these rivers becomes undeniable. They are the silent sculptors of the abyss, carving landscapes in shadow, guiding the flow of life and shaping the seafloor in patterns that will endure long after we are gone. The river moves. The abyss listens. The darkness yields to motion. The trenches deepen further, narrowing into shadowed corridors where the sand flows with an almost imperceptible urgency. Here, the rivers of sediment are no longer gentle streams, but defined channels, guided by subtle gradients and unseen currents that carry grains across hundreds of kilometers. The flow is continuous, ceaseless, unstoppable. Each ripple in the sand, each crescent-shaped ridge, is a testament to forces that have moved with unerring precision for millennia. The abyssal floor is alive, shaped not by surface storms, but by a slow, patient pulse of gravity and water, orchestrating the dance of the sands. The sides of the trenches rise like silent walls, their slopes carved into delicate terraces and ridges. Fine avalanches cascade quietly from the upper banks, settling into the lower channels. These minor slides are almost imperceptible in real time, yet over centuries, they alter the course of the rivers, deepening the channels, redirecting flow, and creating the subtle curves and bends that define the trench. Here, motion itself becomes the architect, with sand as both medium and monument, tracing the history of currents invisible to the eye. The sediment itself is varied, a mixture of pale silts and darker, volcanic grains, each particle traveling a different path, yet moving collectively in a persistent rhythm. Fine sand drifts effortlessly, forming thin sheets across the channel floor, while heavier fragments resist movement, creating mini obstacles that bend and shape the current. Over time, these interactions carve terraces, fans, and bends, leaving a record of movement that is both precise and fluid. The rivers of sand are sculptors, their strokes delicate yet inexorable, shaping the abyss in ways imperceptible to the human eye. Above the channels, bioluminescent life continues its quiet performance. Lantern-like fish drift past, their faint lights illuminating the flowing sand beneath them, highlighting the subtle ridges, depressions, and fans created by centuries of motion. Tiny shrimp pulse softly, flickering with rhythm that mirrors the currents below. Even the smallest flicker of life contributes to the ongoing shaping of the trenches, their presence influencing sediment, guiding currents, and leaving traces that integrate seamlessly into the flow. Life and motion exist as one, inseparable and eternal. Occasionally, the rivers merge, forming broader channels with stronger, more consistent flow. Here, the sediment moves with a slightly faster rhythm, cascading gently over shallow slopes, forming intricate patterns of ridges, arcs, and ripples. The sheer scale is breathtaking, a system of rivers moving in total darkness, sculpting landscapes without pause, invisible yet monumental. The bends and curves of these channels reveal a natural elegance, each one following the invisible logic of water, gravity, and pressure. The abyssal floor is a living canvas, reshaped with infinite patience. Even in the silence, the trench hums with energy. Fine particles drifting with the current create tiny vibrations, subtle yet constant, passing through the water in a pulse that seems almost alive. The sediment shifts imperceptibly, the channels deepen, the rivers continue, and the plain beyond waits to be shaped next. These rivers of sand are not static or dormant. They move with determination, forging their way through darkness, sculpting the abyss, leaving traces of a slow, eternal artistry. The flow guides us toward deeper valleys, where the trenches narrow into sharp corridors, and the full magnitude of these hidden rivers becomes undeniable. Here, motion is mastery, and the rivers themselves are the sculptors, silently carving the landscape, shaping habitats, and moving grains in a procession older than human memory. The abyssal plains above are vast and quiet, but these trenches, these hidden arteries of sand, are the true veins of the deep, alive with motion, history, and creation. The rivers of sand stretch endlessly ahead, twisting and turning through darkness, shaping the seafloor with unwavering persistence. They are eternal, ceaseless, and unseen, yet their work defines the very nature of the abyss. To follow them is to witness creation itself, slow, deliberate, and unyielding. The abyss yields, the rivers sculpt, and the darkness continues to flow. The deeper we descend, the more the landscape transforms. The trenches narrow into sinuous corridors, their walls rising like monumental cliffs sculpted by invisible hands. Here, the currents are no longer gentle guides. They are architects, shaping the abyss with patience and precision. Every grain of sand moves as though it carries the memory of eons, sliding slowly along channels, fanning across valleys, and tracing paths only discernible from the perspective of time itself. The floor beneath is alive, a record of unseen forces in perpetual motion. Above, the water is thick with suspended particles, drifting in the current as though carried by some deliberate breath. Fine silt shimmer faintly under the vessel's lights, outlining the contours of ridges, depressions, and subtle fans. These are not static forms. They shift imperceptibly, constantly rewritten by the flow. Tiny avalanches of sand cascade down shallow slopes, sliding into the channels below and subtly altering their course. In the deep, even the smallest disturbance can ripple outward, shaping the landscape across decades and centuries. The currents themselves are invisible, yet their influence is undeniable. They guide rivers of sand through narrow corridors, around obstacles, and into hidden basins. Their rhythm is deliberate, a quiet pulse that moves sediment with inexorable consistency. Where they bend, the channels curve. Where they slow, sediment fans outward. Where they accelerate, avalanches carve new paths. Over time, these forces produce landscapes both intricate and vast, a hidden architecture of the deep crafted entirely by motion and pressure. Life in these hidden corridors is sparse, but intimately connected to the currents. Tiny amphipods scuttle across the banks, stirring the sand with each movement. Bioluminescent plankton drift in the flow, their faint pulses illuminating ridges and depressions, revealing the precise work of the currents. Even the smallest creatures become participants in the shaping of the landscape, nudging grains and subtly redirecting the flow. In this interplay, the deep becomes a symphony of movement, where sediment, water, and life compose patterns that endure far beyond human observation. Occasionally, larger fragments punctuate the channels, volcanic pebbles, broken shells, or mineral chunks, forming temporary obstacles. The currents adapt effortlessly, weaving around these interruptions, creating miniature eddies, spirals, and terraces. The sand continues its inexorable journey, redistributed by subtle gradients and pressure. In these moments, one can sense the intelligence of the deep, a world that sculpts itself without haste, without observation, without error. The currents are patient architects, shaping every contour with deliberate, unseen hands. The trenches deepen as the channels converge, forming broader corridors where the sediment flows more steadily. Here, the sand slides in silent rivers, rising and falling over shallow ridges, filling depressions and tracing arcs across the floor. The larger the corridor, the more intricate the patterns become, a complex network of motion both fluid and permanent. The abyssal floor is no longer simply a surface beneath us. It is a living sculpture, formed by currents that move silently but with immense power, leaving traces of motion etched into every grain. In the faint light, one can observe tributaries branching from the main channels, their sand fanning into delicate patterns before rejoining the larger rivers. Each tributary is a story of diversion, deposition, and movement. Some are ephemeral, forming and vanishing in decades, while others persist, shaping the main channels for centuries. The deep sea is alive with this quiet choreography, a world where the architects of the landscape are unseen, yet their handiwork is undeniable. The currents stretch outward, unseen yet omnipresent, connecting valleys, trenches, and plains in a continuous flow. Each movement is a sculpting stroke, each ripple a brushstroke on the canvas of the abyss. The hidden rivers of sand continue their eternal work, shaping landscapes, guiding life, and redefining the deep with patient, unyielding precision. The abyss waits, silent. The currents move, relentless. And the hidden architecture of the deep unfolds, grain by grain. The hidden rivers of sand twist and merge as the trenches deepen, forming labyrinthine corridors where the currents assert their silent authority. The flow is subtle yet relentless, guiding grains along sinuous paths that stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Each movement is deliberate, a patient hand shaping the abyss with precision only time can grant. From above, the floor seems uniform, gray, and unbroken, but closer observation reveals a world alive with motion, constantly rewritten by forces invisible to human eyes. The sediment responds with fluid grace. Fine particles drift along the channels, slipping over ridges and filling depressions with seamless continuity. Slight inclines direct the grains in arcs and spirals, while minor disturbances, the passage of a burrowing amphipod, a drifting crustacean, ripple through the flow, subtly altering the shape of the river. Here, even the smallest interactions have consequences, leaving traces that accumulate over years, decades, and centuries. The currents are the masters, but every grain contributes to the ongoing choreography of the deep. Walls of the trenches rise like silent monuments on either side, their slopes etched with patterns carved by previous flows. Small terraces form along these edges, the result of slow sediment avalanches cascading into the channels below. Over millennia, these terraces guide the currents, shaping the paths of sand with an almost architectural elegance. The abyssal landscape is both organic and deliberate, a record of time, pressure, and the invisible hand of motion. Nothing here is wasted. Every grain has purpose, every ripple a story. Life persists amid this motion, delicate yet intertwined with the sculpting forces. Tiny bioluminescent organisms drift in the currents, their faint pulses revealing subtle ridges and grooves in the sand. Amphipods and crustaceans move along the banks, stirring clouds of fine particles that slowly resettle, adding imperceptibly to the landscape. Even the smallest living creatures influence the rivers of sand, shaping channels, redirecting flow, and leaving permanent marks on the floor of the deep. In this interplay, life and sediment are inseparable partners, co-authors of the hidden architecture. Obstacles appear as clusters of rocks, broken shells, or mineral fragments jutting from the channels. Currents navigate these interruptions effortlessly, creating miniature whirlpools and eddies where sand collects before being reintegrated into the main flow. Each obstacle is an opportunity for the landscape to evolve, altering deposition patterns and shaping tributaries that fan outward or curve into secondary channels. The deep sea is an invisible workshop where motion crafts structures with precision and patience unmatched by any surface world. The channels widen as tributaries merge, forming broader, more powerful flows. Here, the sand moves in sweeping arcs, cascading down shallow slopes and forming ripple patterns that extend for kilometers. These patterns are records of past currents, each wave and ridge a testament to the enduring forces that shape the abyss. Over time, minor changes accumulate into monumental transformations, gradually sculpting valleys, terraces, and hidden dunes that define the seafloor. The currents are both artists and historians, recording the passage of time in the language of sediment. As we follow the corridors deeper, subtle shifts reveal the connections between the currents themselves. Smaller channels converge into main arteries, guiding sand from distant plains and trenches into unified flows. The merging currents are powerful yet graceful, forming intricate networks of movement that continue without pause. The deep is alive with this constant orchestration, where energy and sediment converge to shape landscapes hidden in darkness, waiting patiently to be discovered. The currents persist, carving, shaping, and guiding. They are the architects of hidden landscapes, unseen yet omnipresent, transforming the abyssal plains, trenches and valleys with an unwavering hand. Every grain moved, every ridge formed, every sand river flowing is part of a larger design, a continuous testament to the power of motion in a world without light. The abyss listens, the currents command, and the hidden landscapes of the deep unfold, sculpted in silence. The trenches narrow again, guiding the rivers of sand into tighter, more focused corridors. Here, the flow is intensified, not by speed, but by the sheer consistency of motion over millennia. Each grain is part of an invisible ballet, sliding, colliding, and fanning with precision, leaving behind subtle ridges, depressions, and arcs that mark the passage of time. The channels are meticulous in design, formed by forces that require patience beyond human comprehension. The deep is not chaotic. It is calculated, deliberate, eternal. The walls of the trenches bear the marks of this ceaseless movement. Layers of sediment, shaped by slow avalanches and gentle slides, create terraces that rise gradually on either side. Each layer is a history, a chapter written in grains, recording the flow of currents, the deposition of particles, and the passage of time. These terraces guide future flows, channeling the sand into precise pathways that reinforce the architecture of the abyss. The rivers of sand are living manuscripts, each groove a word, each ridge a sentence, each valley a paragraph in the story of the deep. Life continues to play a subtle role in shaping these hidden landscapes. Tiny crustaceans move along the edges of the channels, stirring up clouds of fine sediment that drift slowly into the currents. Bioluminescent fish and plankton punctuate the darkness with faint pulses, illuminating the intricate patterns carved into the sand. Their presence is fleeting yet significant. Every movement subtly alters the terrain, integrating into the flow of sand and leaving lasting impressions over years. In the deep, Life and motion are inseparable, collaborators in an art invisible to the human eye. Obstacles interrupt the flow at intervals. Jagged rocks, broken shells, and mineral deposits jutting from the sand. Currents navigate these barriers with graceful inevitability, forming eddies, swirls, and secondary channels as sand is diverted and redeposited. Each obstacle is a catalyst, reshaping the path of the river, altering deposition, and influencing tributaries that branch off into shallow basins. These minor interventions accumulate over centuries, transforming the seafloor into a complex tapestry of channels, ridges, and hidden rivers that stretch beyond imagination. The tributaries merge again into broader rivers, their flow amplified by the convergence of multiple channels. Here, the sand slides over gentle slopes, forming cascading sheets, ripple patterns, and delicate arcs that ripple across kilometers of seafloor. These patterns are both ephemeral and eternal, shifting imperceptibly in real time, yet leaving a legacy that will persist for centuries. The rivers of sand are both architects and historians, shaping the abyss and recording its history simultaneously in a language written only in motion. We follow a sweeping bend where the main channel curves around a depression, its edges lined with subtle ridges formed by past flows. The current slows slightly here, depositing heavier grains that form small terraces, delicate yet enduring. The bend is a junction where smaller tributaries converge, creating a nexus of movement. It is here that the precision of the currents is most evident. The rivers do not flood, they do not spill, yet every grain finds its place, contributing to a hidden design that is both functional and beautiful. Above the channels, the faint glow of life continues its delicate dance. Bioluminescent creatures drift and pulse, tracing the contours of the sand below. Their light highlights every ripple, every ridge, every subtle change in the flow. It is a fleeting illumination of a slow-motion masterpiece, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, motion and life coexist in harmony. The currents carve, life contributes, and the sand records the history of both. The rivers continue, flowing deeper into the abyss. They are sculptors, archivists, and architects, moving with an unyielding patience that defies comprehension. Each bend, each ridge, each channel is part of a vast network, a silent symphony of motion and sediment, guiding the hidden landscapes of the deep into an intricate, eternal design. The abyss waits. The currents carve. The hidden architecture persists, unbroken. The trenches stretch farther into darkness, the rivers of sand carving paths that seem both deliberate and infinite. Here, the currents are at their most precise, guiding sediment with patient authority. Every grain, from the smallest silicate particle to heavier volcanic fragments, is carried along invisible highways, tracing arcs, bends, and terraces that have formed over millennia. The abyss is alive with motion, yet motion that is subtle, measured, and profoundly meticulous. The walls rise higher, their slopes etched with fine ripple marks and terraces formed by centuries of cascading sand. These formations guide the flow, channeling it along preferred paths, diverting it around minor obstacles, and creating patterns of astonishing elegance. Each curve and bend in the river is purposeful, shaped by the interplay of gravity, water pressure, and persistent current. Here, the deep reveals its patience. Slow, almost imperceptible work that over centuries sculpts landscapes of monumental complexity. Small avalanches occur along the edges, delicate clouds of sediment drifting downward, merging into the river below. Even the faintest disturbance, a passing amphipod, a drifting plankton, a small fish navigating the current, leaves its mark, subtly altering deposition and flow. The rivers of sand are responsive, adaptive, yet unwavering in their forward motion. They are the silent architects of the deep, constructing intricate channels, subtle ridges, and hidden fans in a world without light or haste. Bioluminescent life threads through the darkness, tracing the contours of the sand rivers with soft pulses of light. Tiny crustaceans and shrimp drift with the currents, leaving ephemeral traces in the flowing sediment. Lantern-like fish illuminate ridges, depressions, and minor tributaries, revealing the elegant choreography of the rivers beneath. Every flicker, every pulse is a brushstroke highlighting the artistry of motion. Life and sediment are intertwined, each shaping the other in a delicate yet enduring balance. Obstacles punctuate the channels at intervals: volcanic pebbles, broken shells, and mineral fragments around which the currents bend and swirl. Tiny eddies form, carrying grains into shallow basins or fanning them along slopes. These minor diversions accumulate over centuries, creating complex microterrains within the larger channels. Each bend, each ripple, each fan-shaped deposition is a subtle record of forces both natural and invisible, a quiet testament to the power of persistent motion in darkness. The main channels converge, forming broad, sweeping corridors where the sand moves in continuous silent rivers. Cascading sheets of sediment ripple across the seafloor, their arcs and ridges forming patterns that extend for kilometers. Here, the scale of the current's work becomes evident, a network of hidden rivers moving ceaselessly, sculpting the abyssal plains, valleys, and trenches with a precision and patience that defy human perception. These rivers are not temporary. They are enduring, shaping the landscape for millennia to come. As we follow the rivers deeper, the tributaries fan outward into shallow basins, depositing their load of fire sand, creating delicate terraces and arcs that merge seamlessly into the main channel. Each convergence, each fanning, each deposition is a note in a silent symphony of motion. The hidden landscapes of the deep are continuously rewritten, yet their overall design remains coherent and elegant, a testament to the invisible architects that guide them. The currents sculpt, life participates, and the abyss preserves the record. The rivers of sand continue into the unseen distance, their flow ceaseless, precise, eternal. They carve valleys, shape slopes, and guide life in a world beyond human sight. The abyssal landscapes, hidden beneath darkness and pressure, are living monuments to patience, motion, and the artistry of nature itself. The currents are the architects, and the deep listens. The abyss waits silent, the rivers flow, persistent, and the hidden landscapes of the deep endure, sculpted forever. The abyss grows darker as we descend into the deepest trenches, where sunlight has never touched, and the currents of sand carve paths unseen by any eye. Here, the landscape is both intimate and immense, a series of hidden corridors and plunging valleys where sediment flows with relentless purpose. Every grain slides, cascades, and shifts in a choreography written over eons, shaping the floor of the ocean in patterns both subtle and monumental. These are the rivers that define the final frontier, the silent sculptors of the planet's deepest darkness. The trenches narrow, walls rising like towering cliffs formed by pressure, time, and the slow sculpting of currents. Fine layers of sediment have built terraces along their edges, gently guiding the rivers of sand along predetermined paths. Avalanches occur silently, minute cascades that spread across the floor, redirecting the flow, smoothing the surfaces, and creating delicate arcs and ripples that trace the invisible logic of the currents. In this hidden world, motion is the only constant. Everything else bends to its patient rule. Life clings to these extreme depths in fragile persistence. Tiny amphipods scuttle along the banks, stirring clouds of fine sediment that drift down into the channels. Bioluminescent plankton drift with the currents, their soft pulses illuminating the contours of ridges, depressions, and subtle fans. Even the smallest flicker of light reveals the intricate architecture of the sand rivers, highlighting patterns formed by centuries of unbroken movement. Here, life and sediment are inseparable, co-sculptors in a world that hums silently with unseen energy. The currents guide the rivers with perfect precision, pushing grains along narrow paths, around jagged obstacles, and into hidden basins. Larger fragments, volcanic pebbles, broken shells, mineral deposits, interrupt the flow, creating mini edifices around which the sand wraps and folds. Tiny eddies form in these pockets, circulating particles until they reintegrate into the main channels. The trenches are alive, responsive, and adaptive, yet always moving forward, tracing the contours of valleys, plunging into deeper corridors, and expanding into wider basins beyond. As the channels merge, the scale of the rivers becomes staggering. Sediment cascades across wide floors, forming sweeping sheets, intricate arcs, and delicate ripples that extend for kilometers. The hidden architecture of the deep is revealed in these convergences. Tributaries joining main rivers, fan-like deposits spreading into shallow basins, terraces forming on the banks, all orchestrated by currents invisible, yet absolute in their authority. Each bend, each ridge, each subtle depression is the product of centuries of meticulous work, silent and unstoppable. Occasionally, faint pulses of bioluminescence break the darkness. Lantern-like fish drift through the channels, illuminating the flowing sand beneath. Crustaceans flicker along the banks, leaving temporary clouds of sediment that settle in patterns only discernible over years. Even these transient sparks of life contribute to the sculpting of the trenches, demonstrating that the abyss is not static, but an evolving landscape shaped by the continuous interaction of motion, pressure, and life. The trenches are both laboratory and gallery, showcasing the artistry of natural forces in a world beyond sight. The floor of the trenches plunges further, the rivers of sand narrowing as the walls rise sharply. The currents accelerate imperceptibly, cascading grains down steeper slopes, forming delicate mini-avalanche patterns that fan across the channel floors. These movements are subtle yet monumental over time, carving terraces, deepening corridors, and guiding the sediment along an invisible roadmap etched into the abyss. Here, at the limits of the ocean's depth, the rivers of sand reveal their ultimate purpose: to shape, to guide, and to endure. The darkness is complete. The rivers persist. And the final frontier of the abyss awaits, sculpted by the patient hands of invisible architects. The descent grows steeper, the trenches tightening as if the ocean itself were constricting around the hidden rivers. Here, the currents carry sand with a quiet insistence, relentless yet graceful, shaping the abyss in ways that are invisible to the surface world. Every grain is guided along predetermined arcs, sliding into depressions, cascading over ridges, and settling into patterns that have persisted for centuries. The deeper we go, the more the rhythm of the currents becomes apparent, a silent heartbeat of the ocean's hidden life. The walls of the trenches are lined with terraces formed by countless minor avalanches, each one redistributing the sand, smoothing rough edges, and subtly altering the channels below. Finer sediments drift like a slow-moving fog, filling the gaps, softening ridges, and tracing delicate arcs along the floor. Here, the landscape is ever-evolving, shaped by forces both imperceptible and immense. The trenches are alive with slow, deliberate motion, a motion that defines the very structure of the abyssal world. Life persists even in this extreme darkness, fragile yet purposeful. Tiny amphipods and crustaceans navigate the narrow channels, their movements stirring fine sediment clouds that drift down into the main rivers of sand. Bioluminescent fish pulse softly, illuminating subtle ridges and depressions, revealing patterns created over millennia. In these rare moments of light, the invisible choreography of the abyss becomes apparent. Every pulse, every movement, every particle of sediment contributes to the continuous shaping of the seafloor. Obstacles interrupt the flow at intervals: volcanic pebbles, broken shells, and mineral fragments, around which the currents bend, swirl, and redirect the sand. Miniature eddies form, circulating particles until they reintegrate into the main channels. reinforcing terraces and fan-shaped deposits along the trench walls. These interruptions, though minor, are essential to the architecture of the abyss, creating variation and complexity that enhances the channel's resilience. Every obstacle becomes part of the river's design, an integral note in the silent symphony of motion. The rivers merge into broader channels as tributaries converge, forming sweeping paths across the trench floors. Here, the sand flows with a quiet power, cascading over shallow ridges, filling depressions, and tracing arcs that extend for kilometers. The hidden architecture of the deep is revealed in these convergences. Every ridge, every bend, every fan-shaped deposit is a record of centuries of continuous movement. The trenches are both sculpted and self-sustaining, shaped by currents that adapt to obstacles, life, and sediment in perfect harmony. As the channels plunge further into darkness, the scale of the rivers becomes breathtaking. Sediment fans expand, terraces grow more intricate, and the subtle curvature of channels becomes increasingly complex. The abyssal floor, once thought uniform and unremarkable, is revealed as a vast, dynamic landscape, a record of motion, time, and the hidden artistry of natural forces. Even in the absence of light, every movement leaves its mark, every current shapes the future, and every particle contributes to an eternal design. Above the flowing sand, the faint glimmers of bioluminescent life provide fleeting illumination, revealing the flowing patterns of grains below. Tiny organisms drift and pulse, leaving ephemeral traces in the sediment that subtly influence the channel's course. The rivers of sand respond with gentle precision, adjusting, reshaping, and continuing their ceaseless journey. Life and sediment, motion and stillness, energy and gravity, all converge to form a hidden architecture that is both delicate and monumental. The deepest corridors of the trenches await, where the rivers will carve their final paths, shaping the ultimate hidden landscapes of the abyss. The flow is unstoppable, precise, and eternal, moving with a quiet authority that has persisted for millennia. The abyss listens, the rivers advance, and the final frontier stretches before us, sculpted grain by grain. The trenches narrow even further, walls rising sharply, their slopes carved into intricate terraces by millennia of flowing sand. Each grain moves with deliberate purpose, sliding over ridges, settling into depressions, and tracing arcs that seem almost intentional. The currents are invisible yet commanding, sculpting the abyssal floor with patience and precision that defies comprehension. Every ripple and curve in the sand tells a story of time, motion, and the unyielding forces of the deep. Fine sediment drifts like a slow mist, filling pockets and smoothing edges along the trench walls. Occasional avalanches of heavier sand cascade gently down steeper slopes, leaving delicate arcs and terraces that guide future currents. The landscape is constantly evolving, yet its design is coherent. Each movement builds upon the last, creating an enduring architecture hidden from human sight. The deep is a living sculpture, continuously rewritten by the invisible hand of motion. Life in these extreme depths is sparse, yet profoundly interconnected with the currents. Tiny amphipods and crustaceans scuttle along the edges of channels, stirring fine sediment into delicate clouds that drift downstream. Bioluminescent fish illuminate the flowing rivers, casting soft light on ridges and subtle fans, revealing patterns etched by centuries of movement. Even the smallest flicker of life leaves an impression, guiding the sediment, influencing the flow, and participating in the endless sculpting of the trenches. Obstacles punctuate the channels, volcanic rocks, broken shells, mineral fragments, each one altering the flow slightly. Miniature eddies form around these obstructions, circulating particles until they reintegrate into the main currents. Over decades, these interactions accumulate, creating terraces, fan-shaped deposits, and subtle bends that add complexity to the river network. The deep is responsive, adaptive, yet always moving forward, demonstrating the precision and resilience of natural design. As tributaries converge, the channels widen into broader rivers of sand, cascading over gentle slopes and filling depressions with unending consistency. The currents are powerful yet graceful, forming ripple patterns and arcs that stretch for kilometers across the trench floor. Each pattern is a record of centuries of motion, a history written in grains of sand that flow endlessly toward unknown destinations. The rivers are both creators and historians, sculpting the abyss while preserving the memory of their own movement. Above the channels, faint bioluminescent pulses mark the presence of life, tracing the edges of the rivers and illuminating their intricate paths. Lantern-like fish and drifting plankton reveal subtle ridges, arcs, and fans in the sand, casting temporary light on a landscape that otherwise exists in complete darkness. These brief illuminations highlight the harmony between life and sediment, between movement and stillness, between the unseen architects and the results of their ceaseless work. The trenches deepen further, plunging into darkness so complete that even the soft glow of bioluminescence struggles to penetrate. The rivers of sand flow with unbroken determination, carving channels, shaping slopes, and fanning into hidden basins. Every twist and turn is precise, every deposition deliberate, every interaction a subtle reinforcement of the larger architecture. The abyssal floor is no longer a passive surface, but an active landscape, sculpted, maintained, and guided by the persistent, invisible forces of the deep. The final corridors of the trenches await, where the rivers will complete their ceaseless work, shaping the ultimate hidden landscapes of the ocean's depths. The motion is eternal, deliberate, and absolute. The abyss listens. The rivers carve onward, and the final frontier of the sand rivers beckons. The trenches widen and deepen, plunging into darkness so profound that the ocean above seems a distant memory. Here, the rivers of sand move with relentless precision, guided by currents that have flowed unchanged for millennia. Every grain slides along invisible paths, weaving through depressions, cascading over ridges, and fanning across hidden valleys. The landscape is alive, yet silent, a masterpiece of motion and time sculpted in shadows beyond human sight. Terraces line the walls, delicate yet enduring, formed by countless slow avalanches of sediment. Each slope guides the flow, directing currents along precise arcs and channels. Fine silts drift like slow-moving clouds, settling into minor depressions, smoothing the edges of ridges, and integrating seamlessly into the rivers below. The deep is a canvas, its brush the patient hand of motion, and its ink the flowing sand that records centuries of invisible artistry. Life persists in subtle brilliance. Tiny amphipods scuttle across the banks, stirring grains that drift downstream, subtly altering deposition. Bioluminescent fish pulse softly, illuminating ripples, arcs, and terraces with fleeting light. Even the smallest organism contributes to the shaping of this hidden world, nudging particles, guiding flow, and leaving traces that will be integrated into the channels over decades. In these extreme depths, life is intertwined with the currents, each dependent on the other, each shaping the hidden architecture in silence. Obstacles, volcanic pebbles, broken shells, and mineral fragments punctuate the rivers, forming small barriers around which the currents swirl. Miniature eddies circulate the sand, creating terraces, fan-shaped deposits, and subtle diversions in the channels. These seemingly minor interruptions accumulate over centuries, adding complexity, elegance, and resilience to the hidden river system. Every grain redirected, every eddy formed, is part of the ongoing narrative of the deep, a testament to the precision of motion and time. As tributaries merge, the channels widen into sweeping corridors where the sand flows with quiet authority. Ripples, arcs, and cascading sheets trace the paths of countless grains, forming patterns that stretch for kilometers across the trench floor. These rivers are both architects and historians, shaping the abyss while recording the history of currents, obstacles, and interactions with life. Every bend, every ridge, every deposition is deliberate, a subtle yet monumental act of creation in complete darkness. Faint pulses of bioluminescence illuminate the intricate flow patterns, casting ephemeral light on a world that is otherwise unseen. Lantern-like fish drift through the channels, and drifting plankton highlight the contours of the rivers, revealing arcs, terraces, and fans that record centuries of motion. Even these transient sparks of life leave a permanent mark on the sediment, subtly influencing future flows and contributing to the ongoing sculpting of the abyssal trenches. The trenches plunge even deeper, narrowing once more as the rivers of sand trace their final paths. Avalanches cascade gently down slopes, terraces expand, and subtle bends guide the sediment into hidden basins. The currents continue with unyielding persistence, sculpting valleys, shaping ridges, and defining landscapes that will endure long after the ocean's surface has forgotten them. In the deepest darkness, the rivers of sand complete their eternal task, carving a world of hidden beauty, precision, and silent majesty. The abyss is infinite. The rivers flow unbroken, and the hidden trenches of the deep stand as monuments to patience, motion, and the artistry of the unseen. In this darkness, creation persists. In this silence, motion reigns. And in the deepest trenches, the final frontier of sand rivers endures, eternal, unseen, and sublime.